My wife, Jody, thought that spending a night with another person would be fun. She also thought I wouldn't mind. She may have been correct on the night of fun part, but she certainly messed up thinking I wouldn't object. I was sitting at my desk sipping my coffee and smiling. I was remembering the morning adventure my wife Jody and I had enjoyed just a couple of hours before. Her name is Jodel, but everyone calls her Jody. Spending time with her was always great. We met in high school and, for the most part, only dated each other. I say for the most part because the few times we had what we called disagreements, we both dated other people, but we always made our way back to each other. We shared a special moment of intimacy 1 month before our senior prom and 2 weeks after my 18th birthday. Her 18th was exactly 1 month before mine, and we married 9 months after graduating. She was my only partner, and as far as I knew, I was her only one. My cell phone rang. I looked to see if I knew who was calling. I give my business card out and get calls from numbers I don't recognize, so I can't be selective about answering it. I dislike getting calls from scammers and have gotten calls offering to help fix my computer, improve my credit, or get me better health care. But I especially dislike when the caller says he or she is calling from the IRS, and there are problems with my tax returns, and if I don't call them immediately, they are going to send the cops after me. I am able to tolerate the legitimate calls where honest people are trying to make a living, but I dislike dishonest scam artists and thieves, and as soon as I recognize them, as such I start describing to them what I would do after I stuck a broomstick up their backside. They tend to hang up rather quickly after that. Anyway, my cell phone rang. The screen showed it was Jody's office number. My first thought was, why was she calling from her office phone and not her cell phone? So I answered, "Hello, sweetie. This isn't your wife, Mr. Taylor." That's my name. Taylor. John Richard Taylor, I. And as is the tradition in parts of the country, being the third person in line with the same name, I was called Trey. Jody works in insurance. I sell RVs and concentrate on high-end motor coaches. Neither Jody nor I graduated from college, but we think we do okay. We live in a house owned by my mother and stepfather and pay no rent while we save enough to buy our own. We like the house and the neighborhood and, frankly, are in no hurry to move. My name is Michael Hamilton and I work with your wife. What can I do for you, Mr. Hamilton? I hope it is more what I can do for you. I have some information about your wife that I think you should know. Are you available to meet me around noon today? What kind of information? Is she all right? She was fine the last time I saw her, and as far as the information I have, I much prefer discussing it in person. Listen, Mr. Hamilton, I don't know what kind of joke you and my wife are trying to pull, but I don't have time for it. Just tell her that I didn't fall for it, and I will see her at home. Wait, Mr. Taylor. This is no joke, and she doesn't know I'm calling. Meet me, and you might be able to stop her from having a date. I will be at the Spike restaurant at noon. It is on the corner of Ryan and Alamo. I am wearing a gray suit with a blue tie. He hung up. What the heck just happened? A complete stranger has just told me that I might be able to stop my wife from having a date if I meet him. If this was her idea of a joke, I was not amused. So now I'm in a predicament. Do I meet him and fall for the joke? What if it isn't a joke? Gosh. At noon, I was standing outside the Spike. A man approached me and asked if I were John Taylor. I assured him I was and indicated that we should go inside. He suggested that we just walk for a while to avoid anyone overhearing us. So we started in the direction of the downtown park. We had just started walking, and I asked what this was all about. I started working with your wife 2 months ago. We work in the same section. Almost immediately, I started hearing about her and another person in our section. It was another week or so before I started seeing things for myself. Their names are Stan Morrison, and they go to lunch together almost every day. They have made no secret of their friendship and talk openly. Today, most of the office overheard them talking about going out tomorrow night. They've decided to go to the Hilton because it has a nice restaurant, and tomorrow night there will be live music. They plan on having dinner and then dance to the live music before going up to their room and spending the night. He even called to reserve the room. Even as we speak, your wife is out shopping for clothes for their outing tomorrow night. And spending the night together? Just how do they expect to accomplish that? She is going to tell you the truth. She is convinced that you love her enough to allow her to experience another person, since you are the only one she has ever had. I overheard that bit of information last week. She honestly feels that it will not affect your relationship in any way, I guess. That's why they feel safe talking openly. She doesn't think you will have a problem with it. Why are you telling me this? I was part of a failed marriage for 9 years and my ex-wife had a date. The legal system hurt me more than her partner ever hurt her. She and her boyfriend are now living in the house that I pay for, and my children are calling him daddy. I'm living in a lousy apartment and eating simple meals 5 nights a week. I see this as a chance to possibly help someone else avoid my situation. We talked for a while longer and he left to go back to work. I was left to contemplate my marriage and my future. My conclusion was that if he was telling the truth, my marriage was over. It was frightening that I could so easily consider the possible end of my marriage based solely on a relatively short conversation with a total stranger, but I thought back to my youth and remembered the pain my mother had gone through. My father was both an alcoholic and unfaithful. He had several dates and was open about them. He even teased my mother about them. I asked her why she put up with it. "I love him," was her response. Once, when I was about 11 years old, he took me with him to his then current girlfriend's house. The two of them were somewhere in the house and I was in her living room with her dog. I got tired of sitting there petting the dog, so I left and walked the mile or so home. When I got home, I told my mother where I had been. We only had one car, so she and I walked back to where the car was. She made no effort to confront them, and I don't know if he even realized I had left. We took the car and went home. I didn't see him for about a week and my mother wouldn't let him in the house. 2 days after she did finally let him back in, he punished me with his belt for dropping a kitchen plate and breaking it, but after thinking about it, I thought the real reason was me telling on him. Given my experiences as a child and seeing the pain my mother suffered, I could see no circumstance under which I would or could condone Jody having a date. Her even thinking about having one was too much for me. Call me a jerk, insensitive, overconfident, arrogant, goody two-shoes, or anything else you can think of, but I had no intention of going through what my mother did. She eventually found the strength to leave my father, and we were much better for it. That was years ago. He still lives in town, but we rarely see each other, and that's fine with me. She remarried and is very happy, and as I've already mentioned, Jody and I live in a house owned by her and my stepfather. So what do I do now? Confront Jody or ignore the information I had just received? Wait and see what happens. As a salesman, you can't always wait for someone to walk in the front door ready to buy. You have to be proactive. Give your card out. Make phone calls. Talk to people. Anticipate, be tenacious and resilient, and know your product. Well, that know your product thing might be a problem in this case. If what Michael Hamilton told me is true, I don't know Jody at all, and she apparently doesn't know me. I had made no secret of my feelings about unfaithfulness, and she was well aware of my family history. So I decided to be proactive. But exactly how does one start being proactive in a situation which may not even exist? Start by covering all your bases. Anticipate a worst-case scenario. Then choose a course of action and determine what is the best thing that can happen to you as a result of your decision and what is the worst thing that can happen. If you are not prepared to accept the worst possible outcome, choose a different course of action and keep choosing until you determine what you can accept. I made my decision and determined that my first task was to find a private investigator. There were several in the phone book. I randomly selected one, called, and was told to come right over. 30 minutes later, I was in his office. 2 hours after that, he had lots of my dollars, and we had a plan. It was now time to go home. I had no idea how I was going to act around her tonight. She was home when I got there. When I walked in, she came up to me for our usual hug. I had given a lot of thought about how I should act. I could either act normally, in which case she would assume that everything was okay and her plans could continue if indeed she actually had any plans. Or I could, in some way, hint to her about what I had heard. If I did, she could deny everything and postpone it until things blew over. If she was considering doing it now, what would prevent her from reconsidering, or even actually doing it sometime in the future? I had no intention of living with that possibility. The other side of the coin, of course, was that if she knew I suspected her, it might cause her to abandon their plan. I decided to act normally. Dinner was almost ready. She was just waiting for me to grill the pork chops. I did, and we ate. Acting normally was more difficult than I thought it would be. For me. She, however, was either a very good actress or, as Michael Hamilton had indicated, was so sure of herself that she had no concerns at all and was free to be natural. Around 11, I went upstairs to get ready for bed. Jody was already asleep. I took my shower and went to bed, but I didn't sleep. At 6 the next morning, she got up, got dressed, and went downstairs. A few minutes later, I got up, dressed, and went downstairs. She was gone. I can count on one hand the number of times one of us left the house without a goodbye. This was one of them. It was Friday and normally a good day for selling RVs, but I called my boss and told him I was going to take the morning off. I called the attorney the dealership used and asked if he knew of a good divorce attorney. He referred me to his wife. But let me warn you, she hates husbands who cheat on their wives, so if you did, she probably won't take your case, he called her and sent me over immediately. I told her about my conversation with Michael Hamilton. Her first question was, why did I think it necessary to consult a lawyer and hire an investigator solely on the unsubstantiated story of a total stranger? I then told her about my parents and my personal intolerance for infidelity or anything approaching it. She recommended that I wait and confirm his story. She also commented that if Jody was as confident as Hamilton had indicated that our marriage would not be hurt, she really had nothing to lose by having a little adventure. I informed her that there was no way I would tolerate an adventure, small or otherwise, and if Jody went through with her plans tonight, I wanted to be able to have her served no later than Monday. If Hamilton was either lying or mistaken, I might have to be prepared to eat a lot of crow, but if he was telling the truth, I would be ready. Although hesitant, she assured me that the paperwork would be ready and all that would be needed was the location she was to be served if it came to that. By 1 in the afternoon, I was back at my desk trying to sell an RV to a retired couple who had been married almost 50 years. At first, I had reservations about selling a 45 motor coach to such an elderly couple, but after talking to them and watching the way they interacted, my reservations disappeared. He acted younger than I did and moved with more agility. In fact, I was envious both of his seeming youth and vigor and of their relationship. I had been working with them for a couple of weeks, and it seemed they were now ready to buy. They had picked out the one they wanted, and we had driven it up and down the highway. Their name was Jacobson and Mr. Jacobson had driven it and seemed comfortable and in control behind the wheel. I had trouble concentrating on what I was doing, but I was enjoying their back and forth banter as they discussed the pros and cons of motorhome ownership. They were exactly what I wanted Jody and me to be after a long, happy marriage. In the end, I decided to give them a new and added incentive. I decided to call it my trade discount. I had never done it before, but I really liked them, so I threw in part of my commission as an additional discount. They bought the RV and left with smiles on their faces. It was time to go home. I checked with my investigator and was assured that everything was ready. At 5:30, I pulled into the garage. Jody's car was in its usual spot. I went inside and didn't smell anything to indicate that dinner was being cooked. I was as calm, cool, and collected as I thought possible. I put the package my investigator had given me on the mantel and resisted the urge to find her, so I sat in my recliner and waited to see what would happen. I didn't have to wait long. At 5:45, she came downstairs dressed to impress in what apparently was the clothes Michael Hamilton told me she had been shopping for the day before. She was gorgeous and had her overnight case with her. "Wow, you look great. What's the occasion? One of the guys at work has been after me to go out with him, and I decided that it would be fun." "What do you mean go out with him?" "Like on a date?" "Yes. What kind of a date?" "Well, we thought that since you are the only person I have ever been with, that it might be fun for me to have an adventure with someone else, so we are going to have dinner, go dancing, and then spend the night at a hotel." I couldn't believe how calm she was and how much my feeling of being calm, cool, and collected was replaced with a huge cold knot where my stomach should be. "You can't be serious. You're spending the night with another person? There's no way in heck that I will agree to something like that. And who the heck is this you're talking about? I wasn't asked about this." "It's no big deal. Just one night of having fun. Tomorrow I'll be home, and it will be like nothing ever happened. Besides, I might learn a trick or two you might enjoy. There is no way you're going out tonight and doing that with someone else." "Don't be silly. Of course I am Jody. If you do this, our marriage is over. Just then we heard a car horn. That's him, she said, heading to the front door. I beat her there. Please don't do this, I said, blocking her path. I have to go. She walked around me and then tried to hug me. I will be home about noon tomorrow, and you will find nothing has changed. If you get in that car, you won't have a home to come back to. Now you're really being silly. Have a good evening thinking of me having fun. When I get home tomorrow, we can enjoy ourselves. Good night. I never watched her get in the car. I walked to the mantel and turned off the recorder I had put there. I took a box of garbage bags upstairs. It took me almost 2 hours to remove all evidence that she had ever lived here. I emptied her closet and her side of the bathroom cabinet. I even took from the safe the few pieces of jewelry she had, her birth certificate, high school diploma, and her social security card. I took all of it downstairs and set it by the garage door. Then I went through the downstairs collecting her stuff, her family photo albums, her high school awards, and the bronze statue by Remington she had inherited from her grandfather. I even removed all of the little magnets she had put on the refrigerator. I crammed everything in her car. Then I backed it out of the garage and parked it on the street. I put the keys on the driver's seat. I went to bed and tried to sleep. No luck. All I did was toss and turn. I finally got up and brewed a pot of coffee. I turned on the TV and tried to watch an all-night marathon of Hogan's Heroes and drink coffee. For 2 nights running now, I had no sleep. I felt like a zombie. I was at the dealership early. By 11 o'clock, I had closed the deal with the Jacobsons from the day before, and they were driving off the lot in their highly discounted motor coach. I had also done all of the financial stuff I thought was required. At 11:45, I was home and received the new set of house keys from the locksmith. My investigator was also there with copies of the videos he had made over the last 18 hours. At 12:30, I was watching a video I had gotten from the investigator when I heard the front door bell. I went to the door and opened it. Hi, sweetie. My key doesn't work, and why is my car on the street? I stood in the doorway blocking her from coming in. Your key doesn't work because you don't live here anymore. And your car is on the street because since you don't live here anymore, I didn't want it in my garage. What are you talking about? This is my home. Now let me in, she said as she tried to go around me. I told you last night that if you got in that person's car, you wouldn't have a home to come back to. All of your stuff is in your car. You can't be serious. It was just I didn't hear the rest of what she was saying because I slammed the door in her face. She pounded on the door for several minutes before I opened it. If you don't stop beating on my door, I'll call the police and have you arrested. I probably couldn't do that, but I had nothing to lose. You can't do that. This is my house. This house belongs to my mother and stepfather, and they determine who lives here, and they have determined that you no longer do. Now leave. Again, I probably couldn't legally do that, but I did it anyway. I slammed the door in her face for the second time and resumed watching the tape. I looked out the front window sometime later and she was sitting in her car. I went to the kitchen for a drink of water, but changed my mind and had a gin and tonic instead. I watched more of the tape. During the course of the afternoon, I had gotten madder and madder. I heard the doorbell ringing. Well, not actually ringing, it was steady and unending. If it is Jody again and in the mood I am in, I will probably rip her apart and feed it to the neighborhood dogs. I ran to the door and jerked it open to find her sister, Judy, standing there leaning on the doorbell. Jodel and Judy. Their parents had little imagination. Their brother's name was Jacob. I just looked at her. You are such a jerk. My sister is at my house crying her eyes out, and I want to know why these sisters are driving me crazy, I thought as I slammed the door in her face. Slamming doors seems to help me blow off steam lately. I turned to go back into the room and the bell started ringing again. I jerked the door open, and before she had a chance to ring it again, I slapped her hand off the bell so hard she lost her balance and almost fell. If you ring that bell one more time, I will break your fingers one at a time. I started to slam the door again. She pushed her body against it and stopped it from closing. Please, just talk to me. I stood there for a few seconds and slowly opened the door, gesturing for her to come in. She walked into the room and stopped. Then she looked at me. I thought you loved Jody. I can't believe you kicked her out because of a silly argument. She told me that you disagreed with her last night about going out, and that's why you kicked her out. Oh my goodness. She's right about the argument. She did want to go out and I didn't want her to. Did she mention that the person she wanted to go out with wasn't me? That it was a guy she works with? You've got to be joking. And did she tell you that their plan was to have dinner, go dancing, and then spend the night in a hotel room? That can't be true. You're making this up. She sat down. And did she tell you that she was going to come home today and show me what she had learned? Listen to this. I played her the audio recording I had made the previous night. I had no idea. Well, neither did I. What are you going to do, end our marriage? Oh no. Is there any chance you can work it out? I shook my head. She tried to say something else, but I stopped her. Look, Judy, I have no intention of forgiving or forgetting what she did. This marriage is over. Period. She nodded and thought for a couple of minutes, then shrugged and stood up. I walked her to the door. She stood there and looked at me. I opened the door and escorted her out. For the rest of that evening and all day Sunday, I did nothing. I ate 2 grilled cheese sandwiches and a couple more refreshing drinks. Self-pity had set in and was rapidly taking over my spirit. There was a knock on the door. It was Judy. You said that if I rang the bell again, you would break my fingers. So I knocked. I won't take long. I spent the day talking to Jody. What you told me is true. It wasn't easy for her to tell me about her date, but she finally confessed. What you don't know is that nothing happened. I motioned for her to come in and sit. I sat across from her. What do you mean nothing happened? She told me that after he picked her up here, they went to the hotel. They ordered a bottle of champagne before dinner and had finished half of it by the time they ordered their meal. By the time the food arrived, they were working on their second bottle of champagne. Halfway through dinner, it was empty. After drinking all of that champagne, they felt too intoxicated to dance, so they went up to their room. They did intend to have a romantic encounter, but they were too inebriated to follow through with it. They both passed out. She was the first to wake up and realized what had happened. She woke him up and insisted that he drive her home well. That's quite a story. You believe her, don't you? What I believe is that she and this man spent days, maybe weeks or months planning this date. In that planning process, they spent time together at lunch and work, maybe even after work. They talked and schemed. During the time they spent together, they grew closer. They laughed together, walked together, and shared secrets. He probably knows more about my marriage than I do. Actually, I know he does. He knew my wife planned to betray me. They may have even held hands, hugged, or cuddled with each other. They planned to spend the night together just to have physical intimacy. That's the ultimate disrespect and betrayal, not love. She just looked at me. You don't believe her, do you? No, I don't, and you're not going to forgive her. Even though nothing happened, not in this lifetime. We reached the door, and I opened it. She paused. When this is over, can we still be friends? Jody and I are getting divorced. If she contests it in any way, it's going to be messy. By the time it's over, you probably won't like me, so any friendship between us will most likely fade away. I see. Well, it could have been nice. I think I'm going to miss you with that. She placed her hand on my left cheek and gently. Then she left, softly closing the door behind her. Since Saturday afternoon, my phone had been off more than it was on. Jody had tried to contact me countless times, but had finally given up. I did have a conversation with her father. He tried to convince me that since nothing had happened between Jody and Stan, no harm, no foul had taken place, so we should just move on and get over it. I explained to him the same way I had to Judy. When we ended the conversation, he knew that divorce was inevitable. He ended the call with a sigh. Monday arrived. The first thing I did was call my lawyer and inform her about the weekend. I also told her to serve Jody. She would most likely be either at work or at her sister's house. I was assured that she would be served before the day was over. It was a long day, and I don't remember anything I did. Shortly after 4 in the afternoon, my cell phone rang. I looked at the caller ID. It was Jody's office number. I took a chance and answered it. Trey Taylor. Good afternoon, Mr. Taylor. This is Michael Hamilton. I thought you might like to know that there was some commotion here a little while ago. Really? Yes, sir. Your wife was served, and after she read the papers, she fainted. The EMTs were called, and they took her to the hospital. When she fainted, she dropped the papers. After the EMTs left with her, Stan Morrison picked up the papers and looked at them. Then he nearly fainted. If the situation hadn't been so serious, it might have been amusing, but I saw no humor in the destruction of another marriage, and I had no sympathy for either of them. I will keep you updated on events as they unfold here. Please do. My phone rang once again. It was Judy. Hello, Jody has been taken to the hospital, so. Just thought you should know. Nope. Not even remotely interested in her or her well-being. Are you truly that heartless? Trey, any coldness in me is a direct result of your sister. I told you yesterday that things would get complicated. This is just the beginning. The next couple of weeks went pretty much as expected. Jody tried numerous times to talk to me, but I had no desire to listen. Her father and mother both tried to persuade me to talk to her, but I refused. My mother spent a lot of time trying to cheer me up. I kept telling her I was fine, but she insisted I wasn't, so she made even more of an effort. Michael Hamilton called me almost every day. He seemed to be enjoying himself. He was the only one at their workplace who knew that I knew about the affair with Morrison. Jody showed up for work, but she just sat there, except for the time she went out to meet with her lawyer. Jody and Morrison never spoke to each other, at least not in front of others. As for me, I was simply waiting for the right time. Our lawyers arranged a meeting. It was to be both attorneys, Jody and me. It was the first time I had seen her since I kicked her out. I couldn't help but notice that she had lost weight and looked exhausted. I was surprised to see Judy there. Jody's lawyer asked if it was all right if she stayed. I looked at her. Are you certain you want to be here? I'm here for Jody. That's not what I asked. No, but I need to be. I told the lawyer that I had no objections to her staying. Jody was already seated, so the rest of us sat down and her lawyer began. Mrs. Taylor strongly denies the alleged adultery and requests that the divorce petition be dismissed so that she and her husband can work on saving their marriage. She is open to attending counseling if it will be helpful. My lawyer and I exchanged glances and smiled. My lawyer responded, if no adultery occurred, would Mrs. Taylor care to explain her actions on the evening in question? We all turned to look at her. I would be happy to. Let me start with when my friend came to pick me up. Does your friend have a name? My lawyer asked. Of course, but his name isn't important. Nothing bad happened, so there's no need to bring him into this. I left the house and got into his car. We went to the hotel. She went on to repeat almost word for word what she had told Judy, and of course what Judy had told me. Champagne dinner, more champagne in the room, and too intoxicated to engage in intimate activity. My words, not hers. They both passed out and slept through the night, drove home the next day, and her husband kicked her out. Oh, woe is me. Poor misunderstood me. I made a mistake. I love my husband and want him to forgive me, so we can start a family and grow old together. I looked at Judy, who was hanging on her every word and nodding in agreement. All right, said my lawyer. Let's assume for a moment that what you just said is true and no intimacy took place. During the course of the evening, was there any touching or other physical intimacy? Any hugs, holding hands, anything that your husband would consider crossing a line? Absolutely not, Jody said firmly. Judy nodded and smiled. My lawyer glanced at me, and I looked back at her. Sitting in front of me was a remote control device. I picked it up, pressed play, and a screen dropped from the ceiling. On the screen, there was a footage of Jody approaching Stan Morrison's car in our driveway. He got out of the car, walked around to her side, and opened the door for her. When they met, they shared a passionate hug. A long, intense hug. They got into the car and drove away. I pressed pause. Lie number one I stated for everyone in the room. They were all sitting up slightly straighter now. Jody was pale, and Judy just sat there, staring at her sister. On the Thursday that Michael Hamilton first called me and I talked to my investigator, the plan we came up with was to document every move Jody made on Friday evening, starting with Stan Morrison's arrival at our house. We knew from Hamilton's information where the date was to take place, and we knew they had already booked the room. We even knew the room number. What we didn't know was if he could get into the actual room they had booked and film any activity which might take place. As it turned out, he could. You also said that no inappropriate touching or fondling took place. Is that also correct? Yes, a bit hesitantly. I pressed play for the second time. We watched as the happy couple followed the waiter to their table in Hilton's dining room. Morrison's hand on Jody's behind. Lie number 2, Jody looked around the room. Her attorney was busily reading the divorce petition, and Judy had suddenly found her fingernails fascinating and was looking at them intently. The video continued. Jody and Morrison ordered a bottle of champagne. They never stopped hugging until it arrived. They hadn't finished their first glass when they jumped up and headed for the elevators. It cost me an even $1,000 for my investigator to get access to their room before they checked in, and 4 minutes after the pair entered it, Jody was on her knees doing something inappropriate. At this point, Jody screamed and ran out of the room, followed by Judy. I pressed pause. It seems like my client didn't accurately recall all of the events of that evening. I will talk with her and get back to you," said her attorney as he gathered his papers, stuffed them in a folder, and scurried after the 2 sisters. My attorney and I chatted for a few minutes, and I headed back to the RV dealership. Shortly before closing, Judy came in and walked slowly over to my cubicle. I just sat there. She stood for some time before asking, "May I sit down?" "Help yourself, silence. Didn't you knew what when I came over to your house that first Saturday you already knew that they slept together?" "Yes. I was watching the video before you came in. And I can promise you they didn't do much sleeping. They messed around, Judy. She's my wife, and she let another man mess around with her. Why didn't you tell me? I'm not sure." I guess I was hoping that she would admit it and agree to the divorce. If she had, I would have settled for something other than adultery. That way you and your family wouldn't have had to know what she did. "I've always liked your parents more." Silence. My cell phone rang. I answered without thinking. "Trey Taylor." "It's Michael Hamilton, Mr. Taylor. I was off yesterday, but I understand that your wife called in and quit. She didn't even come in to clean out her desk. Thought you would like to know. Thank you. Let me know if you hear anything else." Judy started to speak, but the office loudspeaker interrupted her. "Trey, you have a call on line 6. "Trey, call on 6, Trey Taylor." I picked up the phone and talked to a prospective buyer for about 15 minutes. Judy sat there not moving. After I ended the call, Judy and I looked at each other. "She's gone, Trey." "What do you mean gone?" "Dead. She loaded her car and left. She's probably just moving into her own place." "I don't think so. She told me to tell Mom and Dad that she was sorry she disappointed them. It isn't just your parents she disappointed." "Yeah, we know." More silence. Listen, Judy, I have work to do, so if you don't—" "Oh, sure, yeah, I'm sorry," she said, rising. "I better go." She stood, looked at me, then turned and left. That night when I got home, I took my copy of the video the investigator made. My attorney still had the copy we had used earlier. I put it in the player and sat down. I had only watched it completely once. This would be the second time. When I stopped playing it in the attorney's office, Jody was doing something inappropriate to Morrison. I fast-forwarded to there and watched as he messed around with her. He put his hands on the back of her head and held it as he engaged in inappropriate activity. She finally put her hands and pushed him away, gasping for breath. Morrison was skilled when it came to engaging in inappropriate activity. Then I watched as he engaged in inappropriate activity with her. She was very vocal in her responses to his constant and almost intense activity. I watched as he engaged in inappropriate activity with her 3 more times. As I watched the video, I tried to figure out exactly what my reaction was. It dawned on me that when Jody and I were intimate, we were making love, but she and Morrison were doing something inappropriate. No romance, no love, just intense, raw connection. He didn't care about her feelings or emotions. He just wanted to connect. And it appeared that Jody felt the same. The element of roughness came as a surprise. I couldn't recall any indication that she wanted or would accept anything other than love and tenderness. How could I have missed that? I sat there trying to come to grips with my emotions. Part of me wanted to scream in pain at having my best friend and only love betray me like this. Another part of me wanted to confront her. My mind was like a bowl of spaghetti, all jumbled up with no order or direction. I fell asleep in my recliner thinking about intimacy, not lovemaking, intimacy. And the person I was intimate with had no face. Since I first met Jody, whenever I thought of that kind of activity, her face was the one my mind's eye saw. 2 more weeks went by. My attorney tried several times to set up another meeting with Jody and her attorney, but couldn't. Jody couldn't be found. A month went by. Then another and another. Still no word from her. I had talked to both Judy and her parents a couple of times during that period. I asked if they had heard from her, and the answer was always no. I thought about getting an investigator to track her down, but my attorney talked me out of it. I had canceled the credit cards and taken half of the money, but records indicated that she had not touched any of what was left. If she stays gone for a few more months, we might be able to file on the grounds of desertion, but we'll see. My phone rang. Trey Taylor. Good morning, Mr. Taylor. This is Michael Hamilton. Remember me? I certainly do. How are things going? Not bad. Thought I might bring you up to date on a couple of things. Do you remember I told you about my divorce? Sure do. Your ex was living in your house with her boyfriend, as I recall. That's right. He laughed. Yep. I'm living there now. With my kids, what happened, it seems the boyfriend is a thief. Somehow he managed to convince my ex that she should steal money from her company, and now they are both in jail. I laughed. Good. Forget them both. Are you still working at the same place? Yeah, that's the other reason I called. Since your wife left, it has been pretty quiet around here, and Stan Morrison has kept pretty much to himself. But for the last week or so, some of his phone calls have been pretty interesting. How well? Today he was talking to your wife, and how do you know that I heard him say miss you too? Jody, did you happen to overhear anything that might give you an indication of where she is? I have a divorce petition she needs to sign. I have the phone number she called from. Would that help? He laughed over the phone. How did you get that? After Morrison finished talking to her, he went back to his desk, put his phone down, sat for a couple of minutes, and went into the boss's office. I went over, picked up his phone, and looked at the last call he received and wrote down the number. Piece of cake. Good work, Mr. Hamilton. Thank you. And if you hear anything else, keep me informed. You can count on it. Then he gave me the number, which I passed on to my attorney. The area code was Southern Florida. I decided to make a phone call. Hello, Judy. This is Trey. What do you want? Trey, do you or your family know anyone in Florida? Why? Because I think Jody is there. Why do you care where she is? Because I want a divorce, and in order to expedite it, she has to get the paperwork and sign it. When are you going to ask where in Florida she's living? I don't have to ask. My attorney is working on finding her even as we speak. Maybe I can save him some trouble. She lives in Fort Lauderdale. Why are you telling me now? Why didn't you tell me before? A long silence. Let me ask you a personal question, Judy. Don't answer if you don't want to. Have you ever been treated roughly in a relationship? Yes, and did you like it? No. I loved it. Why? She took a deep breath and looked directly in my eyes. Speaking for myself. And only for myself. When I have a romantic encounter, I try to make it as enjoyable for my partner as he is trying to make it enjoyable for me. That means I tend to follow certain conventions in touching, feeling, and being intimate. But on those occasions when the partner or environment or events or even alcohol provide sufficient additional stimuli, the experience can be incredibly intense. A light spank, a tug on the hair, or anything else out of the realm of what we call normal can heighten the romantic experience considerably. Wow. She had obviously given this a lot of thought. I looked at her, and her eyes were no longer looking at me. She was looking through me and into some memory. Have you ever felt immense pleasure that made you lose consciousness? No, but I talked to a woman who has, and apparently it is quite an experience. Jody did what Jody did. I watched her on the video I have. She was unconscious for a few seconds. Oh my goodness. Really? I took a sip of my drink and didn't answer. We sat there for a while, lost in our own thoughts. Trey, yes, could I watch it sometime? The part where she loses consciousness, could I watch it? The thought of it excites me so much I'm getting really excited just sitting here. I have known this woman for a large part of my life, and I never dreamed I would ever hear anything like that come out of her mouth, or that it would turn me on. That feeling started in my groin, the tingling, and it moved up and spread out. Over 3 months of abstinence was catching up with me. I wasn't interested in making love. I wanted to be intimate with someone. I think that could be arranged, she smiled. I went home a short time later. In bed, my thoughts were on intimacy, not lovemaking. This time there was a face attached to it, and the face belonged to Judy. She and I talked several times over the next couple of days. She gave me Jody's address and told me that she had talked to Jody and told her the divorce papers were coming. I gave it to my lawyer, who almost immediately sent Jody the divorce papers. Judy and I decided that Friday night we would go out to dinner, then go back to my house and watch the video. She was quick to point out that a revenge romantic encounter ... or any other kind of romantic encounter ... was not in the cards, and if that was my plan, I should forget it. She was not going to engage in any romantic activities with her brother-in-law. Period. On Thursday morning, I was at work and received another call from Michael Hamilton. "Hello, Mr. Taylor. Thought I would bring you up to date on current events. Stan Morrison just quit. He didn't give a notice. He just walked in, cleaned out his desk, told the boss, and left. He told one of the other people in the office that he was moving to Florida." Well, that's interesting. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I appreciate you telling me. Oh, by the way, how are you getting along? Pretty well, thank you for asking. My wife has confessed to stealing and has copped a plea. She will get a light sentence, but her boyfriend is looking at a pretty lengthy stay in prison. I hope he serves every single day as some big muscular guy's friend. I laughed. We chatted for a couple more minutes and ended the call. Then I called Judy. "Hi. I was just thinking about you," she said when she answered. "How long have you known that Stan Morrison was moving to Fort Lauderdale? Up until now, I don't think she knew that I knew his name." A long silence. "Judy, how long have you known Trey ... How long? A few days. How many times have they seen each other since she moved there, Trey? Listen to how many times had they seen each other since she moved there?" A short pause. 4. She's been here twice, and he's gone there twice. They've seen each other 4 times that you know about. And you were okay with knowing that she was still involved with that jerk, and you were okay with her coming back to me after all that. Trey ... She's my sister, and I ended the call. My phone rang immediately. It was Judy. I ignored that call and her next 3 calls as well. I sat in my cubicle for a couple of minutes, then walked out to the maintenance shop. I enjoyed talking to the mechanics and watching them work on the RVs. One of the mechanics was a good friend. Last year, the Army retired him because of wounds received in Iraq. His left leg below the knee and 2 of the fingers of his left hand had been severely injured. He and my boss were the only 2 people at the dealership aware of my situation. We went outside and sat at the employees' picnic table, and I brought him up to date. I can arrange for him to not make it to Florida if you want me to. Nah. Neither of them is worth going to jail for. I just want to be free of her. I can arrange that as well. I laughed. Nah. Having to live with herself should be punishment enough, so we talked some more until we heard over the loudspeaker, "Trey, call on line 4. Trey, line 4. I went back to my cubicle. "Trey Taylor, Trey, please don't hang up." I hung up and walked over to the receptionist. "No more calls for me today. I'm going home." I turned down my street and saw Judy's car sitting in front of my house. I pulled in my driveway and into my garage. The garage door closed before she got to it, so she went to the front door and knocked. I guess she still remembered my threat about what I would do if she rang the bell. I went into the house through the garage and into the kitchen. She was still knocking. I decided to open the door. "You're not welcome here, Trey." Listen, I closed the door in her face. I didn't slam it this time. I love Italian food, so I heated a frozen spaghetti and meatball dinner and went to my bedroom. By 10 p.m., I was asleep. The next morning, I showered, shaved, dressed, and went to work. Judy was waiting for me. I guess she thought I wouldn't cause a scene at work. She was wrong. I tried to walk past her, but she grabbed my arm. "Gosh darn it, Trey, listen to me. You have nothing to say I want to hear, but I've got something to say to you. You were willing to let her come back to me, knowing she was involved with that awful person, and you weren't going to tell me. All 3 of you can go to heck." It was a long time before I saw her again, but she talked to my mother occasionally. So now the whole dealership was aware of my situation. It had the potential to be a long day. I paced around the dealership for a couple of hours trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I managed to get through the day and headed home. My mother called and invited me to dinner. I went, and she had Italian food, of course. She, my stepfather, and I enjoyed the meal and most of the evening. The enjoyment ended when she said, "I spoke to Judy today. Mom, another word about that family and I'm leaving Trey. Listen to me. There's something you don't know. I know all I need to, Mom. Jody cheated, and I'm divorcing her. Okay, that's fine. She cheated, and you're divorcing her. But what are you going to do about the baby? Oh, shoot, Mom. You're not going to fall for that. Are you? There's nothing to fall for, Trey. She's pregnant. I talked to her myself when she was here. I literally jumped up. I saw her, and she told me she was here, and you didn't tell me, Trey. She asked us not to, so you listened to a certified cheating person and disregarded the feelings of your own son. We thought you needed a little more time to forgive her. Forgive her. Are you crazy? Have you forgotten what your life was like living with a cheater, sweetie? Things are different now. It's a different world. People are freer to try new things, and I stormed out of the house. Was I living in some universe where everything was upside down and backwards? My mother lived through hell as my father cheated time after time, and now she's telling me that it might be all right for my wife to cheat. I loved my mother, but her naivety was astonishing and gullible. God help her, but in the age of smartphones and the internet, she would still buy an encyclopedia from a traveling salesperson. But to tell me I should forgive Jody was way over the line even for her. I headed home but drove past my house and kept going until I reached the dealership. With the keys I had, I let myself in. I found a sofa in the employees' break room and tried to calm down. Unfortunately, it wasn't very effective. I tossed and turned until 5 in the morning before I finally fell asleep. I woke up at 10:30 a.m. and realized that my boss must have seen me sleeping since he left a sign on the door telling everyone not to disturb me. When I started to move around, one of the other salesmen told me that the boss wanted to see me in his office. I was feeling terrible. My back hurt from sleeping on the sofa, I needed to shower and shave, and my mouth tasted awful, but I went to see the boss anyways. Trey, you need some time off and I have the perfect solution for you. Do you remember the Jacobsons? That elderly couple you sold the nice blue Prevost to a few months ago? Yes. Well, they were in Vancouver, Canada last week, and he had a heart attack. He's going to be okay, but the motor coach needs to be brought back home. They asked for you to do it. That sounds like just what I need right now. When can I leave? You can fly out tomorrow. Janie will get you a flight. Use the company credit card for any expenses. That sounds good. Now go back home, freshen up, and pack. It should take about 4 days to get back, but I'd recommend taking 10 if I were you. The Jacobsons aren't in a rush, and I certainly don't need you back here too soon. Just pass any pending deals to Ben, and he'll take care of them for you. I immediately headed to the hospital once I arrived in Vancouver. Mr. Jacobson was hooked up to various machines and tubes, while Mrs. Jacobson was doing her best to make him comfortable, even though he kept complaining about her disturbing his sleep. They both had smiles on their faces, grateful to be by each other's side. I stood there for a few minutes, just watching. It was the first time I had smiled in a long while. Mrs. Jacobson looked up and spotted me. Trey. It's good to see you, she exclaimed as she hugged me. Hey Trey, how was your flight, Mr. Jacobson chimed in. Now be quiet, Robert. You know what the doctor said, Mrs. Jacobson scolded. She patted my arm and winked at me. I can tell him to be quiet now, and he can't argue with me because it's doctor's orders. We sat, talked, and watched as Robert drifted in and out of sleep. Every time we thought he was out, a nurse would come in to check his vitals or make adjustments to his medication. Mrs. Jacobson informed me where the motor coach was parked. She also mentioned that their grandchildren had been with them, but their grandson had already flown back home. Their granddaughter was packing a few things for them to take back with them once Robert was released, but she would be riding back with me. We finished our conversation when the granddaughter walked in, carrying 2 small overnight cases she had packed for her grandparents. She was about my age and had a pleasant girl-next-door charm. We were introduced, but she didn't pay much attention to the introduction. In fact, she snorted before speaking to her grandmother. After a short conversation, they both turned to me. Darla, Mrs. Jacobson gestured to her granddaughter, has been driving our car this past week. We towed it behind the coach. She will take you to the motor coach so you can do whatever you need to do to get it ready to go. Darla started to protest, but Mrs. Jacobson interrupted her. Now stop it, Darla. I told you we'll be fine, so don't worry about us. She looked at me. No offense, Trey, but Darla doesn't want to ride back with you. She thinks she needs to stay with us. By the way, Your boss told us that it might take you a few extra days to get back because you were taking some time off. You might want to consider going through Yellowstone. We promised Darla we would go through there on our way home. I'll do my best, Mrs. Jacobson, I replied. And with that, we left. Oh, Trey, here's a letter authorizing you to take the motor coach across the border. Your boss said it might be a good idea, Mrs. Jacobson handed me a letter from her purse and hugged me. Thank you for doing this, and be careful. Darla and I made our way to the car and drove to the RV park. She did the driving but complained the entire time, never speaking to me directly. I tried a few times to strike up a conversation, but she made it clear that she wasn't interested. So, I looked out the side window instead. When we reached the motor coach, she immediately went inside. I wanted to attach the car to the coach and prepare for an early departure, but she had taken the car keys with her. I went inside and asked her for them. She threw them at me, and I narrowly avoided getting hit in the eye. What's wrong with you? I asked as I bent down to pick them up. I had dealt with difficult women for the past few weeks and was getting fed up with it. I went to the car, positioned it behind the coach, and attached it. I conducted a thorough inspection of the motor coach and then took a seat in one of the lawn chairs. After a short break, I thought it would be nice to enjoy a cold soda, so I stowed the chairs in a small table in one of the lower storage compartments. I went inside to see if the Jacobsons had any soda. Darla was rummaging through the refrigerator. Is there any soda in there? Or some snacks to eat? I'm not your servant, she snapped as she slammed the refrigerator door and retreated to the bedroom, slamming that door shut too. That was it. I had dealt with enough women with bad attitudes, Judy, my mother, and now this person I hardly knew. I was tired of it. Mrs. Jacobson was the only one who had treated me with any kind of kindness. 10 days? No way. I hadn't heard a single kind word from Darla the entire day, and I had no intention of tolerating her rude behavior any longer than necessary. I would get this motor coach back home in just 2 days. The less time I spent with her, the better. I went outside, disconnected the power and water lines, returned inside, sat in the driver's seat, started the engine, input Houston, Texas into the GPS, raised the levelers, put the motor coach into gear, and headed south. It was 6 p.m., and I had initially planned to start the next morning, but Darla's attitude in the bedroom changed my mind. By 8 p.m., I had crossed into the United States and passed through customs. Darla briefly came out for that before retreating back to the bedroom. Thanks to a full tank of fuel, we had 200 gallons of diesel, and that big Cummins engine was raring to go. At 7 a.m. the next morning, we were in Burley, Idaho. I had stopped twice during the night to make coffee and sandwiches, so I was a bit tired. I sensed Darla's presence without actually seeing her. She sat in the passenger seat and stared out the windshield. After a few minutes, she finally spoke. I'm hungry. Is there anything to eat? Just the sound of her voice made my tiredness vanish and my desire to finish this trip as quickly as possible grow. Remembering what she had said the previous night when I asked about food, I'm not your servant, I replied as I pressed down on the accelerator pedal. She glared at me before storming back to the bedroom. A little before 9, fatigue hit me hard. I had been driving for 18 hours straight, which was never a good idea. But I did it. As a result, I was drained when I pulled into another rest area between 2 trucks and lay down on the sofa. I fell asleep almost instantly. When I woke up, I could hear the hum of the Cummins engine and feel the motion of the motor coach. I sat up and checked the time. I had slept for 5 hours. Darla was in the driver's seat, and we were on the move. She had taken over surprisingly well. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in the passenger seat, sipping it. 2 hours went by without either of us saying a word. That was good. I was starting to worry about our fuel situation, though. We had been driving for about 25 hours. At an average speed of 60 miles per hour, we had covered roughly 1,500 miles. With a fuel consumption rate of 8 miles per gallon, we had used up most of our fuel. I decided to bring up the subject. We should probably stop at the next truck stop for fuel. No response. Excuse me, but I think we might need to refuel soon. I took care of it while you were snoring, she said, surprising me. I went back to the sofa and soon fell asleep again. I hadn't noticed her using the bathroom, eating, or drinking. She must have done all of that while I was sleeping. 3 more hours passed as Darla continued driving. I was impressed with her skills and her ability to hold her bladder. Finally, she pulled into a truck stop in Dumas, Texas, and parked. It was a little after 10 p.m. She got up, fixed herself a sandwich, grabbed a soda from the refrigerator, and disappeared into the bedroom. That was my cue to take over driving. So I did. After making 2 chicken salad sandwiches and brewing a thermos of coffee, I settled back into the driver's seat and headed towards Houston. I stopped once during the night to use the restroom and picked up some snacks and coffee. At 8 a.m. the next morning, I pulled into the dealership parking lot in Houston. I desperately needed sleep, but I also needed to use the bathroom. I stepped out of the motor coach the first time in days since going through U.S. Customs. When was that? It felt like a week ago, even though it had been less than 40 hours. I was exhausted, but at least I was done dealing with Darla. I used the bathroom meant for customers since I was really in need. I walked out just in time to see the Jacobsons' car leaving through the gate. The driver's window was open, and I could see a middle finger raised high in the air. I returned the gesture. It was almost time for the staff to arrive, so I thought I would brew a pot of coffee in the employees' break room. When I walked in, the sofa called to me, and I answered. I didn't move until after 3 in the afternoon. When I finally got up, I yawned, scratched my backside, and made my way to the door. There was a note on it in large letters instructing me to see the boss if I ever woke up. I walked down the hall and knocked on his office door. "Come in," I entered. "You know, the other employees are getting tired of you hogging the break room," I yawned again. "I received a phone call this morning. It was from Mrs. Jacobson." I scratched my backside once more and took a seat. It was a very interesting conversation. There was a pause. She wanted to know how you did it. I was in a rush to get back, so I pushed myself to drive for an extended amount of time. "Oh, we know how you got home." She was curious about how you did it without harming her granddaughter. What? Apparently the granddaughter is a real pain and seems to have no respect for other people's feelings. The Jacobsons didn't want to send her home with you, but also didn't want her to stay with them. She caused them nothing but embarrassment the entire time she was with them on their trip. The grandson left because he couldn't stand being confined with her in the vehicle any longer. I know how he feels. The only reason I spent so much time driving is every time I gripped the steering wheel, I thought of my hands being on her throat, and it felt so good. I didn't want to stop. He laughed. "Anyway, they are happy you made it home. Okay. Mr. Jacobson should be discharged in another week or so. All indications are that he will fully recover after a little rest. They want us to service the vehicle. We will have one of the guys take it to their place." That's good news both about him and keeping the vehicle. I thought they might want to sell it. Oh, absolutely not. They love it and have even talked about becoming full-time RVERs. All right, now I want you to go home for a couple of days and get some rest. But no, buts darn it. Just do what I tell you to do. It might give the other employees a chance to get their break room back. I had been away for only 3 days, but it felt much longer. I went home, took a much-needed shower and shave, and went to bed. I probably slept for 30 hours over the next 2 days, but at some point, I was going to have to rejoin the real world. The first step was, I suppose, to check my phone and see what I had missed. I had given absolutely no thought to it over the past several days. I began searching for it. I looked in the pockets of the clothes I had worn on the Vancouver trip, and it wasn't there. I called my boss and asked him to check the break room and the vehicle to see if it was there. It wasn't. Darn it. How many customer calls had I missed? I headed for the dealership. There were several messages from customers, so I started returning them. By mid-afternoon, I was pretty much caught up. I had gone to the employees' break room and poured myself a cup of coffee. Just as I was leaving to go back to my workspace, I saw her come in. Little Miss Attitude. I turned and headed for the service area. I had been there, hiding, for about 10 minutes when the PA system sounded. "Trey, please come to my office." Trey to my office. I took my time sipping my coffee. "Trey, my office, ... please," I knocked. "Come in." "Oh, good, there you are. I believe you know Darla Jacobson. She was telling me about the trip back from Canada." She just sat there. I looked at him in disbelief. I had, of course, told him all about the trip. He had a twinkle in his eye that I had only seen a couple of times. Once when the dealership had an exceptional month of sales and he had seen nothing but dollar signs. The other time was when his twin sons had both received full-ride scholarships to the University of Texas. He was enjoying this. He smiled. Miss Jacobson came to return your cell phone. Apparently you left it in her grandparents' car. Just then, his phone rang. If the two of you will excuse me, I have to take this call. She stood, and I gestured for her to go out of the office before me. She walked into the showroom, and I followed at a safe distance. She stopped, and I did the same. She turned to face me and extended her hand. My phone was in it. I was too far away to take it, so she took a couple of steps towards me. I moved back the same number of steps. She almost smiled. Am I really that annoying? She took several steps towards a nearby table and placed the phone on it. Yes, she moved away from the table, and I moved to pick up my phone and head back to the service area. The thought of saying thank you never crossed my mind. Trey, I stopped and cautiously turned back to her. I overheard some of your messages. I couldn't help it. I heard them as they were being left. You did my grandparents a huge favor, and you have your own problems to deal with. Trey, I'm so sorry I acted the way I did. She turned and walked out of the dealership. Well, isn't that unfortunate? She has a kind side. And it even seemed genuine. I went to my workspace and sat down. Just a couple of minutes later, there was a loud crash outside. I looked towards the street and saw that at least 2 cars were involved in an accident. Usually I avoid getting involved in situations like this and let the professionals handle it. But one of the salesmen who had been outside came in and said, Trey, I think that silver car belongs to the lady who came to see you. Oh no. I ran to the crash site. It was her. The EMTs hadn't arrived yet, but there was someone trying to stop the bleeding on Darla's scalp. Someone else was tending to what appeared to be a broken arm. Darla looked up and saw me, and this time she actually smiled. You always seem to catch me at my worst. Then she passed out. The EMTs arrived shortly after that and stabilized both Darla and a passenger in the other car, then took them to the hospital. I overheard them telling the investigating police officer which hospital they were going to. I returned to work. I had been at my desk for about 15 minutes when I remembered the Jacobsons. I thought I should call them and let them know about Darla. I did and reassured them that she didn't appear to be in any real danger. She had cuts, bruises, and probably a broken arm, but I thought she would be all right. I heard Mrs. Jacobson telling her husband. Then I heard his response. Broken arm? Too bad it wasn't something more serious. Might have taught her some humanity after scolding her husband, Mrs. Jacobson asked me if I would call Darla's parents and inform them. She gave me their number, and I did. Then I remembered my phone. There were 54 messages, half from my mother and the rest from Judy, potential customers, and 1 from Michael Hamilton. I called the potential customers and scheduled 4 appointments for the next couple of days. I ignored the others. I left work at 5 and headed home. The hospital the EMTs said they were going to was nowhere near my house, but I found myself there anyways. I checked with the information desk and found out that her room was 646. I went there. When I walked in, she already had visitors. Her parents. Trey, meet my parents. Mom, Dad, this is Trey Taylor. Trey, my parents, Ralph and Joanne Jacobson, nice to meet you, Trey. Darla hasn't stopped talking about your trip, said her mother. I'll bet she hasn't, I thought. How could you stand being in that small vehicle with her for 2 days? She would have driven me crazy, said her father. It isn't a vehicle, Dad. It's a coach. It's a vehicle. Pretty fancy, but still a vehicle. Ignore him. Trey, how are you? Fine. Except for a broken arm and some stitches. Well, I better go. Just thought I should check in on you. Take care of yourself. Thanks for stopping by. Oh, Trey, said her father. Thank you for calling my parents and us. You're most welcome. Goodbye. I went home and debated with myself about calling my mother. It was a short debate. The negative side won because I couldn't think of a positive reason, and so it went for about 3 weeks. My mother and Judy tried repeatedly to call, but I ignored them. Even my stepfather called. I talked to him, but ended the call when he tried to put my mother on the phone. My attorney had sent the divorce papers to the address Judy had given me. I guess she was enjoying living with and spending time with Morrison because her signature was big, bold, and in bright red marker. Her reported pregnancy was never mentioned. In about 2 months, I would be a free man. I started thinking about being single. The thought of that brought up other thoughts, like the celibacy I had experienced. Celibacy. Oh no, it has been a long dry spell. Suddenly, I felt a discomfort in my groin area. I needed to have some fun. I sat for just a minute before going to the bathroom to shower and get ready to go out to eat. I had just finished getting dressed when my phone rang. Trey Taylor. Hello, Trey. This is Dottie Jacobson. Well, hello, Mrs. Jacobson. How are you? And how is the patient? Call me Dottie, please, Trey. He's fine. Actually, he's better than fine. We're planning our next trip and he wants to go to Colorado, but I'm a bit concerned about him driving in those mountains. What do you think? Dottie, that vehicle won't let him get in any trouble. All he has to do is turn on the Jake brake and leave it on, and as long as he doesn't try to break any speed limits, he will be fine. That's what he says. He has read articles on mountain driving and is excited to try it. I think I'm going to get some Valium before we go, she chuckled. Based on my experiences with them, I was positive that she would go with him anywhere he wanted to go, whenever he wanted to go, and vice versa. I admired them. Anyway, the reason I called was to invite you to a small barbecue we are having to celebrate Robert's recovery. It will be at our place this Friday at 6. Bring your wife. We would love to meet her. It dawned on me that I had never discussed my personal life with them, and apparently Darla hadn't either, so they had no idea I was almost divorced. Thank you, Dottie. I would love to come. See you then. It had been a good week. I'm usually happy if I sell 1 vehicle a week. This week I sold 3. One of them was a high-end used coach that used to belong to a country music star who just purchased a newer, fancier model. My commissions for the week were very nice. I pulled up to the Jacobson estate at exactly 6. There was a large garage separate from the main house where, I assumed, they kept their coach. After I drove it back from Vancouver, it had been serviced and cleaned, and the service department had returned it to them. I knew they had money because they wrote a substantial check for the coach, but their estate was magnificent. I pulled up to the front of the house and a valet parked my car. Now, I'd been to plenty of events, but I had never had a valet park my car at a private residence. I was directed through the house into the backyard. There were about 50 people already there. Dottie saw me and hugged me, asking where my wife was. I explained that I was in the process of getting a divorce. She held my arm and stated that my wife was foolish. Then, she hugged me again and led me towards the rest of the guests. Listen to me, Trey. When you are ready, I know of several nice young ladies who would love to meet someone like you. She then introduced me to the other guests as a friend, not as the guy who sold them their coach. I knew that I was walking with some pretty important people in this crowd, and that any nice young ladies she would introduce me to would be way out of my league. I decided to stay for just a short time and leave. I had just finished a delicious sandwich and refreshing drink and was looking for Dottie and Robert to say goodbye when I saw Darla storm away from some guy. I hadn't known she was here, but probably should have assumed she would be. I had seen that look before and didn't want any part of it, so I turned so she wouldn't see me. Too late. Come on, Trey, she said, grabbing my arm. First Dottie and now Darla. This was a family of arm grabbers. She led me inside to the library. The house had a lovely library. That guy is a jerk. He said I had an attitude problem and needed help. I started to leave. Where are you going? Leaving before you kick me out, because I agree with him. He didn't have to say it out loud and in front of people somebody should Trey. You need to be on my side. Why? The only polite words you've ever spoken to me were when you were lying in the street bleeding and probably delirious. She plopped rather than sat. I remained standing. We never looked at each other. How's the arm? I asked. It itches like crazy under the cast. I have to carry this so I can scratch. She pulled what looked like a back scratcher out of the cast. It had tiny fingers so it would fit between the cast and her arm so she could reach the itchy spot. I'll be glad when this thing is off, indicating the cast. I have to go, Trey. Yes, if I promise to behave. Will you have dinner with me? After a short pause, I said, Darla, I'm going through a divorce, so I don't need any more stress, and I would probably do something to make you mad and make it worse. So I don't think dinner is a good idea. I left. Saturday morning, my mother rang my doorbell. I let her in. Here's the deal. I have given it a lot of thought and I agree with you. There are some things that we should compromise on and some things we shouldn't. Fidelity in a marriage is on the not compromise list. You reminded me of the absolute hell I went through with your father and nobody should have to do that. I apologize for even considering wanting you to take Jody back. I was selfish in that I was just thinking about the baby and the possibility of having a grandchild. Please forgive me. I did, and we hugged. We chatted for another hour or so, hugged again, and she left. Mid-morning Monday, my phone rang. Trey Taylor. Good morning, Trey. This is Michael Hamilton. I have news. I don't know when he got on a first-name basis with me, but what the heck? What kind of news? Stan Morrison called and asked for his job back. They said no. I laughed. Just thought you would like to know. Thank you, Michael. Now I'm on a first-name basis with him. Just before noon, the Jacobsons' coach pulled into the yard and parked right in front of the building. I was with customers, so couldn't go out and greet them, but I was able to see it. I sat and talked with my prospects for at least 30 minutes and nobody came out of the coach. I escorted them out to their car and then went to the coach and rang the doorbell. Darla answered. Hi, come in. I stepped up into the coach. When you enter a coach like this, the door is right beside the passenger seat. There are generally 3 or 4 steps up into the coach. When you get to the top of the steps, you have to immediately turn left or you bump into the driver's seat. When the coach is moving and a passenger is in their seat, the floor slides out to cover the steps so that their feet are on solid footing and not dangling in the stairwell. Anyway, I stepped up into the coach and followed her to the living area. Have a seat, I sat. There was a wonderful smell of lasagna coming from the oven. There were 2 glasses of wine on the kitchen counter. She handed me one of them and took the other for herself. She reached hers out to me, indicating that we should clink them. We did, and we both took sips. It was a very nice Chianti. I had said nothing up to this point. She leaned back against the stove and jerked away from the heat. Then she moved a bit and leaned back against the counter. She took a rather large gulp. You said dinner was out, but I figured lunch might be okay. I also thought I might embarrass or make you mad in public, so I figured this might be a bit more private. I asked Grandma and Grandpa if I could use the coach, and when I told them why, they thought it was a good idea. He just made me promise that I wouldn't drive back when I got mad. Notice I said when I got mad, not if he knows you pretty well. Doesn't he, instead of the expected blushing reaction? She took a rather large gulp of her Chianti. Her face was a bit red, but she didn't explode. I took a sip of mine. She turned her back to me and stayed that way even after refilling her glass. I saw her take a deep breath and turn back to me. I hope you're hungry. I made it this morning. My lasagna is really good, even if I say it myself. She busied herself with the salad and garlic bread. I thought to myself that she was doing pretty well with a cast on one arm. The doorbell rang. Would you get that, please? I stood and walked to the dashboard and pressed the button. The door opened. My boss was standing there. He looked up at me. Everything all right? I looked down at him. So far, I said as I closed the door and returned to my seat and wine. I watched her putter around and it seemed that she was enjoying doing it. Her moves were natural, so it was obvious she knew her way around a kitchen, even one as small as this. I smiled, but only for a moment. I knew that one of us was going to do something to make the other mad. It was just a matter of time. She told me to sit at the dining area table. I did. Generally speaking, in a coach which is 45 feet long and 8.5 feet wide, there is not a lot of room inside. The slide-outs increased the width in the living area and bedroom to around 11 feet. The living room starts immediately behind the driver's and passenger's seats. Then you have the dining and kitchen areas across from each other. Then the bathroom and shower, and at the rear of the coach is the bedroom. We ate and chatted and realized that we had finished the bottle of Chianti. I also realized that neither had made the other mad. After a couple of hours, I decided I needed to go back to work. Darla, thank you. This was a pleasant surprise and the food was delicious. It was my pleasure. I started for the door and she followed. I had taken a step down to leave. Trey, I turned my head to look at her. She leaned down and hugged me, softly and tenderly. Neither of us knew who was more shocked. There was a long pause as we just looked at each other. Is dinner still off the table? she asked with a twinkle in her eye. How about tonight, love, to? Say 7 o'clock, that was just a few hours away. She gave me her address and I started to leave. Again. But we hugged. Again and again. It took me another 10 minutes to leave. When I finally stepped off the coach, I saw 6 faces looking at me through the showroom window. My boss was one of them. When they saw that I had seen them, they all scattered ... except my boss. He opened the door for me when I entered. Well, I'm going home to get ready for a date tonight, we laughed. 10 minutes later, Darla drove the coach off the lot. I was on my way to her house when my phone rang. Trey Taylor, so you managed not to kill each other. Hello, Dottie. I assume Robert is listening, you bet. I'm listening. We have already heard her story, now we want to hear yours, I laughed. You know, a gentleman never tells nonsense. Hush, Robert. Trey, it was funny when she asked us to borrow the coach. She was nervous and didn't want to tell us why she wanted it, but Robert wouldn't let her have it unless she did. So, she did. As she was telling us, she got excited and told us about the lasagna she made. I asked her how she knew you liked lasagna. I just know, Grandma, and she blushed. Trey. I've known that girl all her life and didn't know she knew how ... but she actually blushed. Trey piped up, Robert, I don't believe I'm saying this, especially given that girl's crabby attitude. Robert, watch your language. Yes, dear. Anyway, Trey, as far as I know, that girl has never done anything like this. She may make me, Robert, I'm sorry. She may make me mad, but she's still my granddaughter, so you better treat her right. Do you understand? Yes, sir, but I think you might be overreacting a bit, darn it. Sorry, Dottie. Trey, just don't hurt her, okay? She has had some pretty rough experiences in her relationships. She is, as you know, very attractive, and it seems that all her life men have tried to take advantage of her. It started back in high school, and she has had trouble dealing with it. Unfortunately, her attitude is her defense mechanism, and she uses it to avoid getting close to someone only to be disappointed by them. The problem is, she has trouble distinguishing friends from enemies, but it is only a facade. There's a nice girl in there somewhere. We just have trouble finding her sometimes, said Dottie. I won't hurt her, Dottie ... and Robert, good, they said together. But have you asked her not to hurt me? And we all laughed. I had no sooner ended that call when my phone rang again. Trey Taylor. Trey, this is Judy. Silence. I went from happy to upset in an instant, but decided to hear her out. Are you still there? What do you want? Judy, I thought you should know that. Jody, stop right there. I don't want to hear anything about her. Trey, please. Just listen for a minute. Yesterday she kicked Stan out for having an affair. Earlier today he went back into the house and beat her up. She's in the hospital, Trey. Her nose is broken. He knocked her down and kicked her. She is in intensive care. And Stan is in jail. What about her baby? There isn't one. She lied about that to try to get you to take her back. Well, she certainly fooled my mother. She fooled us all, Trey. I'm sorry she's hurt, but it doesn't concern me anymore. And as far as I'm concerned, Morrison can rot in jail. She's still your wife until the divorce is final. She stopped being my wife when she got in his car, and she made it official when she signed the paperwork. Whatever happens in her life now has nothing to do with me. Goodbye. Darla lived in a gated community. After seeing her grandparents' estate, that didn't come as any surprise. But the reaction of the guard at the gate did. He asked who I was there to see, and I told him. Really? And he started laughing. He was laughing when he called her to see if she was expecting me, and he was still laughing as he opened the gate. I heard him say good luck as I drove through the gate. 15 minutes later, when we went through the gate on our way out, he was on his phone and was still laughing. I got the impression she was not the most liked person in that community. I discovered that she was a meat and potatoes kind of girl. She ordered a medium rare ribeye steak with blue cheese butter and a baked potato. That's my kind of meal. I had a fleeting thought about how she was going to cut the steak with her arm in a cast, but she managed. We both chuckled at how awkward it was, and I even offered to cut it for her, but she struggled through. She managed to eat about half of her steak before ignoring it and concentrated on her drink. Our waiter suggested he put the rest of our food in a takeout container. I didn't know you had takeout containers here. There's a first time for everything, he said. We stopped at the security gate to key in the password, and the same guard was there. Rather than laughing, He had a surprised look on his face. I commented to Darla about it. I don't have many dates, and he isn't used to seeing me come home from them in the same car I leave in. I usually come home in a cab. That made sense to me. When we got to her house, she invited me in. What would you like to drink? Gin and tonic. We sat and sipped, not talking much. Finally, she stood and crossed to stand over me. I looked up at her. Trey, I'm not too good at this. I haven't had a lot of experience, so you're going to have to help me. I put my glass down and stood. We hugged. Slowly and softly, I unbuttoned her shirt, starting at the top. She was breathing a bit quicker. I really wanted to gaze at her beautiful body, but I restrained myself. I hadn't touched her for a few seconds, so she opened her eyes and looked at me. Her eyes lowered to my face. We made love to each other passionately. My brain kicked in, and a fleeting thought crossed my mind. The waiting period was not yet over for my divorce to be final. So was I in the process of doing what Jody had done. It didn't take long for me to decide. She signed the papers, so as far as I was concerned, I was a single man and was going to enjoy this. Limited experience or not, Darla certainly seemed to enjoy the time with me. Give me a minute to catch my breath. I pulled her to her feet and held her for a long time, then started to take her to the sofa where we could get intimate. I took a step and fell on my face. It seems you can't walk too well. Darla dropped to her knees beside me and started hugging me. We stayed like that for a couple of minutes, just looking at each other. I reached with both of my hands, pulled her to me, and hugged her. Hard. While we were hugging, she moved her body over mine. I was being intimate with only my second person ever, and I was in heaven. Our eyes locked on each other, unblinking, as we made love with each other. I saw sweat forming on her brow as she moved. We were both desperate, but neither wanted to end, so we slowed down. Eventually, the inevitable happened, and we reached the point of no return. We both experienced the biggest, most wonderful physical and emotional experience known to humankind. Our eyes were still locked on each other as she moved. We were like that for about an hour. I have no idea how she managed it. I was comfortable, but she had to be uncomfortable. My eyes opened when I felt her stir. She raised herself, put her hands on the floor on either side of my head. I think we should spend more time getting to know each other, don't you? And we did. We made love 2 more times that night. At 9 the next morning, I called my boss and told him I wouldn't be in. Why, I'm still on my date from last night, he laughed. Darla and I took a shower together, then ate breakfast. By noon, we had made love twice more. The last time was different from the others. At one point, she touched my body. And when she hugged me, the gentleness was gone. I sensed something else. But on those occasions when the partner or environment or events or even alcohol provide sufficient additional stimuli, the intimacy can be out of this world. A pat on the back, a tug on the hair, or anything else out of the realm of what we call normal can heighten the intimate experience considerably. That's what Judy had told me. My hand went to the back of Darla's head. I grabbed a handful of hair and pulled. Her head turned back, and her eyes opened wide. She took a sharp intake of breath, looked at me, and smiled. Make love to me passionately, and I did.